I would like to begin the class today on opposite color bishop endings or endgames, same thing. Why such topic for today? I found recently, I mean more like over the course of the last couple of days, some interesting endgames that have been played during this Opera Rapid Champions Chess Tour, and I thought it would be interesting to review some of them, and not only for, let's say, my own knowledge, but also I felt like it would be a good idea to share with the viewers on the channel of the St. Louis Chess Club. And and basically such endgames are usually considered as drawish, right? Because opposite color bishops and always have those drawish tendencies. However, it is not always the case, and I prepared several examples in which I analyze different scenarios, what can happen in different types of endgames with opposite color bishops, depending pretty much on the pawn structure. So the first game I wanted to start with is the one that actually I lost, and this is the game I lost to Sam Shankland in 2019. It was Summer Chess Classic. In general, to give the context about this game, it was a very long game, 100 moves. The game lasted like 6 hours, I guess, or something. And after the opening, I had a very bad position, and ever since I was always on the defensive side. Sam made some mistakes, and he could have finished me even before the time control. Then I somehow got some chances, and someone I was probably even close to making a draw. However, in the end, we got position which was I thought already pretty close to being drawish, and perhaps it was. However, I made some mistakes, and I had the possibility to trade into go into, let's say, opposite color bishops, and I did go for that. So let's see what happened. So in general, what I would like to discuss at first is position after knight takes b3. So I will not go into detail, but essentially, let me just double check everything works. Everything works, okay. So essentially, I'm down. Okay, I was always down a pawn here. I got a pawn back right now temporarily, but after king e3, followed by bishop takes b4, I'm gonna lose this pawn again. And while we have two connected pass pawns, and supported by the pair of bishops, of course, there are certain chances for white to win this game. And I had some chances here to save this. I don't want to go into detail how exactly and what. What matters, let's say, for the sake of this lesson, is that ended opposite color bishop endgame, which I achieved after bishop g6 and now g4. So here are some for sure he had known, and I didn't know at the time, the intricacies of such endgame. And here I thought I still have some chances to make a draw based exactly on this move idea of knight d3. Because knight d3 right now is a big, I thought is a big threat that he cannot allow, because this immediately trades bishops. Trades my knight for the bishop and enters the opposite color bishop endgame with only one extra pawn. And even though the pawns are connected, even g pawns are connected, I thought that I have pretty good decent chances to save it, because I will be able to bring my king quickly to the king side, blockade the pawns. Maybe the d pawn would be sort of like and deflecting white bishop or white king from supporting those pawns, and I will make a draw somehow. However, things are not so easy, and actually after g4 knight d3, knight bishop takes d3, bishop takes d3, position is still lost. And this is, I think, very instructive, because even though it seems like it's very, very close to it being a draw, it is lost. And the reason why it's lost is white's next move. If I had one more move here and I get to play, let's say, king d5, yes, it would be probably a draw. However, if white is to play, white plays king d5 first. So here is one of the, let's say, rules about, in general, endgames, king's activity. King always, maybe not always, but in majority of situations, king in the endgames, king has to become an active piece. And king, after king e5, I do not really lose this d4 pawn. I mean I will lose this pawn probably anyway, but I can still defend it, let's say with bishop e2 or something. But the main problem right now is that white will manage to push those pawns very comfortably forward. G6, obviously not f6, not to blockade the pawns, and I cannot stop this. And finally, after those moves f4, f5, g5, g6, king will come to g5, pawns, and then follow f6, and lots of ideas connected with f7. Then very likely there'll be some Zugzwangs and so on. So let's see what happened in the game, how I lost, and let's learn from it. King d7, f4. There's pretty much nothing I can do. The only way I thought to stop this those pawns was to bring my king to the king side. And this is, let's say, decent idea, but it's not sufficient. Just king takes d4, bishop b2, and g5. And seemingly it should be a draw, sort of, like it may feel like, because it's only 2 pawns, right? And if only I can give my bishop for those 2 pawns, it should be a draw. It will be a draw. However, it is not possible in such instance because g6 is pretty much unstoppable. If bishop h5 anytime, I can just play move king e5, and there will be some Zugzwang in the end that I will have to let go of g6 square, and I will lose. So after this, let's say king f4, and let's say finally bishop c3. This is the first Zugzwang, and there is no way to stop g6 because king has to leave g7 square. Sorry, f7 square cannot go to g7. And bishop also cannot stay here forever. That's why I cannot stop g6. So after bishop b5, king e5, I try to keep my bishop from e8 with an idea to basically after bishop c3, after getting or bishop from d3. Idea in general was to kind of stop f6, f7. This is because I have to somehow stop f6, f7. So either I have to keep my bishop on d3. X-raying this pawn on g6, or keep my bishop on e8 to put bishop, to put some pressure on g6 pawn in this way. So after bishop d3, king g5, bishop c4, f6. Actually, white is winning because the king, right, there is no. I have to stop somehow f7, right, with black, and I cannot same time hold f7 and put pressure on the pawn on g6. That's why if I cannot in time to bring this bishop here. But the thing is, and even if I was in time to do it, for instance, because I could have, let's say, gone for position after king e5, let's say bishop e8, king bishop c3, let's say bishop b5, king f4, king g8, and right now let's say not bishop d3 but bishop e8. Nothing would have changed because in this position, let's say king h6, and again I'm in Zugzwang because the bishop that cannot stay on this diagonal too much. If this bishop had one extra square, let's say, up the board, right? It wasn't in the back rank already, but let's say it was one more square, let's say, somewhere on the d file, hypothetically, it would be a draw. For instance, if, let's say, we move those pawns upwards, pawns to f5, white pawns to f5, g5, king to h5, and black king to g7, of course, white would have light square bishop, and black would have a bishop on e7. Then it will be a draw. Maybe it's a little bit abstract what I'm talking right now, but basically, then I have this extra square on d8. If we move, let's say, those pawns on the 5th rank, everything by down a file, then there will be d8 square, and this will be a draw because there will be no way to break through. However, in this particular instance, it is simply lost. So in the game, follow bishop d3 and the king g5, f6, and right now king f8, bishop b4 check, king g8, and essentially right now the king simply goes on the dark squares around to e7, and I cannot stop f7, and the game is just decided. So this is exactly what happened. King f4, bishop b3, king e5, bishop c4, bishop e7, not necessary but sufficient, king d6, bishop c4, I wait in place, king d8, finally bishop comes back, king e7, and here I resigned because finally white plays f7, and I cannot stop this. There was absolutely nothing I could do, and that's how I lost the game. So this is the first game I wanted to show. Even though it seemed like it was very close to a draw, it was not close enough, unfortunately. Even like going back to the beginning of this endgame, let's say in here, those pawns are only on f2 and g4. So it may seem that they should be somehow stoppable, but because of the such active king on e5, those pawns and my own king very passive on c6, it should have been already, let's say, on g6 to try to make a draw here. I think that the game this is already lost. I mean, I know this is simply lost because of this backing on c6. So yeah, very instructive. I learned myself after this game that even though seemingly with 2 pawns and the such endgame with 2 pawns are not trivially drawish. Nice lesson, painful lesson, but nice one from Sam here in this game. Alright, so next game I wanted to talk about is my game against Turkish Grandmaster Dastan. And in this game, on the other hand, I won. And the position I wanted to talk about is the following one. Let me just double check if it showed up. Showed up, alright. So, just double check. Yeah, okay. So this game was played in the year 2017. And this is... Okay, I have 2 extra pawns. And one pawn is on b5, which is a pass pawn, which is very nice. Very important factor. But there is any other pass pawns on the king side. Therefore, in this position, the only plan that white can do is to apply the rule of creating second weakness, pretty much. Because right now, with only one pass pawn on the b5, let's say even if that's, for instance, if the king comes to, okay, it's black to play, let's say king f6 following the game, king f1, let's say move like king e7. If white, let's say, basically brings the king to c4 or something like this, like he's king 6, king d3. This didn't happen in the game, by the way. But okay, bishop b6. Let's say king c4. Okay, what next? I'm just bringing my king to c4, but there is no breakthrough here. So it means that the only path to supposedly even win this is to create a second weakness somewhere on the king side. And to do this, I have to somehow start pushing my pawns forward, and I have to do it in a very skillful manner. Because if I get to, let's say, block my pawns, if black gets to block my pawns, I will not be able to win it. For example, one good, let's say, a strategy to win this, let's say after bishop b6, this is to play move g4, h6, and bishop c6. Slowly start pushing f4, e4, and so on. In general, in such endgames, apart from creating a second weakness rule, there applies a rule also about creating sorry, do not hurry. The rule do not hurry. This rule basically implies that one should not rush things and decide on things that are pretty much premature. And instead, one player with, let's say, advantage should focus on gradual improvement of the position rather than forcing matters here. And exactly that's the proper strategy for white. In general, white needs to create a second pass pawn on the king side, and this pawn should be as far as possible from the pawn on b5. So the further, the better, with some caveat which I will talk about in a second. So let's say after king, this didn't happen again in the game. Let's say king e7, analyze f4, f6, let's say e4, and after e5, for instance, let's say one may try to blockade the pawn structure here. So right now it would be a big mistake to, let's say, to play f takes e5, d takes e5, and d5 to create this pass pawn, because right now those pawns are very close to each other, and let's say after g5, everything is blocked. Suddenly, even though white has 2 extra pawns, the position is totally blocked, and there is no way you can win this. However, if you play d takes e5, f takes e5, and now f5, you actually are creating a pass pawn that is far away from this one, and there is a way through for the king, with king c4, king d5. Of course, black will try to play king d6, but at some point there should be some sort of Zugzwang, which will allow us to win the game eventually. And for instance, after g5, takes, king c4, king d6, one can play maybe bishop d5 with idea already bishop of playing f6, and after bishop d8 we can play maybe move like let me just think, maybe king b4 for instance. And the point is that the king cannot move because then king c5 follows very often. Or another possibility is to play doing bishop g8 or something. If king goes here, I can play king d5, and this is winning. Another possibility, you know, if bishop f6, there could be an idea of, you know, just pushing b6, b7, and king d5, even sacrificing a pawn and just promoting the f pawn. In general, those pawns, as they are so far away from each other, black is not able to hold them both from going forward and allowing white king to invade. This is in general what should be white's strategy. Let me show what happened in the game. After king f1, my opponent played move e5 immediately. So it's also logical to try to simplify the position. And again, it would be a huge mistake right now for me to play move d5, even though one may say, okay, in the pawn and in the end games, it's better to keep more pawns on the board and keep less pieces, and so it may be tempting to play with d5. But d5, on the other hand, you know, creates this kind of possible blockade on the dark squares, and we never want to play in d5 in such position with white. That's why I play d takes d5, king takes d5, king e2, slowly improving the king, h6, bishop c6, and f5, and okay. Sooner or later, I will begin pushing my pawns, and this pretty much doesn't matter. This again is general winning for white. However, the nice technique, I present, I think, pretty nice technique how to win it. So that's why I would like to bring this game. That's why I'm bringing this game up. Bishop e8. So right now, pawn on g6 is attacked, and if black plays move king f6. This king will be very passive, and he will be forced to be defending pawn on g6, and I'll be able to bring my king quickly to d5 and so on. So the only way to stop them, my king from coming to d5 will be anyway to play with g5, which turns pretty much the same as in the game. So after bishop e8, black play anyway g5 in this position. And here I think I presented pretty nice technique, because I simply took on g5, take on g5, and now I play with f4. So I keep trading more pawns, but what I accomplished by this is actually I'm gonna have a passed pawn here. I'm actually creating a passed pawn which is far away from the B pawn. So the question here is, okay, king f6 followed, and right now. Very important move is f takes g5. If g takes f4, I have to say that nothing changes pretty much, and I'll take with the e pawn, and after king f6, let's say, or king e6, doesn't matter, let's say king f3, eventually I'm gonna play with g4, and then I have more than you know, more than enough here distance between those pawns to basically win it. In general, the further those pawns are from each other, the better. And let's see. For example, in the example y. For instance, let's say black plays king e7, bishop c6, king f6. Now let's say g4 takes. So right now, again, there are two passed pawns, and white's strategy in general right now is to make sure that both are protected, and then threaten with white king to go to either of the pawns. And because those pawns are so far away from each other, black king and bishop cannot defend both at the same time. For example, let's say bishop b6 seems normal. I will just play bishop e4, for example, bishop c5. You know, black cannot do anything, just have to wait. Bishop d3 and king f3 just has to wait. Bishop a7, let's say, king e4, king e6, f5, for instance. Or maybe bishop c4 to be more precise. Suddenly, there is no good way for the king, nowhere to go for the king, because if the king goes this way, I go with my king. I may not maybe not to d5 immediately, but I'll play maybe f5 first, and then I'm gonna defend my pawn on f5. Let's say bishop d3, and I'm gonna play this way. For instance, bishop b6, again nothing to do, and king d5, and I'm going with my king towards this pawn, and I'm promoting it. And this king is suddenly too far to basically support this bishop, because this king has to be defending pro f pawn from queening. So, because of those two weaknesses, the two weaknesses are basically white's passed pawns b5 and f5. Black is simply lost here. And for instance, just to show as a quick example, is a king e7, king c6. Let's say bishop gets activated to f2, for example, b6, bishop g3 from this side, and again we can play move king b7, or maybe even we can play with b7. Pretty much this should win as well. We can bring this bishop to e6 as well at first. Again, the rule do not hurry applies on all those endgames. Let's say king b7 at some point, followed by king a7 and b7, and this must be winning. There is no way that there will be no Zugzwang. However, in the game followed something different. In the game followed after f4 king f6, and here I had the possibility to actually take on g5 even. After king takes g5, play king f3. And the point is that right now I do not want to have a pawn f pawn, but I want to have g pawn. I want to have this pawn as a pass pawn. To have those pawns g3 and b5, the pass pawn even further away than with the f pawn, which makes my task even simpler than it was before. Let's say bishop let's say in the game I have king f6, and I play bishop c6, king e5, and right now I play move e4, and basically this is the correct strategy because I want to trade those pawns and have g pawn as a pass pawn. And the game, and if f takes e4, bishop takes e4, bishop b6, bishop c6, king g4, king h4. I begin pushing the g pawn. King h5. Here my opponent resigned because g5, g4, g5, g6 is coming. For example, again, after this, let's say g4, there is no way this pawn cannot get to g6. Let's say this. Suddenly, this pawn on g6 keeps this king on g7 occupied with defense of this, to defend this g pawn from promoting the queen. And right now, by defending this bishop, this pawn with the bishop at first, right now we have time to bring our king towards the queen side. So not e4, but let's say here. And if here, let's say we can play king f3, even we can go like very long route. And there is absolutely nothing black can do, even like this. It's not the most maybe technical, but there is absolutely nothing black can do. And we just go on the light squares. Finally, we get there, and king supports this pawn to go to the queen, and the game is over. So in this position after king h5, because of all those possibilities, those pawns being simply too far away from each other, this is winning for white. My opponent resigned. However, here's one small caveat that I wanted to talk about. If this pawn on g3 wasn't on g3, but let's say it was on h3, I'm not sure whether if I can change it here on lichess it quickly. However, okay, I will try to do it. One second. Scroll down probably. No, I don't know how to change it, but okay, let's imagine hypothetically it's pawn on h. It's not on g3 but on h3. All right. So let's put it like this, to h3. So this endgame would be actually drawn, even though those pawns are even further away from each other. This endgame would be drawn, and we'll see in a moment a similar endgame that could have happened in the game Nepomniachtchi versus Grischuk from the Opera Rapid, that in which this similar endgame would have resulted in a draw. And why is it a draw? Because basically black has very simple defensive idea: give up this bishop for this pawn, and keep this king on h8. And there is immediate draw because the pawn, the bishop on c6 is a wrong color bishop towards this h8 square, and this is immediate draw. So having said that, let's move to the next game. And the next game I wanted to talk about is actually Nepomniachtchi Grischuk. So Nepomniachtchi in this game, it was a very, very, very long game. And for a very long time, white was better here. Nepomniachtchi was much better, and even here he was better. Let me just double check it. It's there. It's there. Okay. Okay. So Nepomniachtchi was pushing and pushing and pushing for a win, and but then he missed something, and they got this endgame, which is very close to a draw. It's pretty much with correct defense, just a draw. So let's see how, because Nepomniachtchi won this game, let's see what happened that he managed to win this game. So king e2, logical, right? Very logical move, king e2. Simply bring the king forward to the queen side. King c3 is correct. Bishop d5. And right now, Grischuk made sort of unnecessary mistake, I believe. Because, okay, not a mistake, inaccuracy. Probably, of course, it was move number 54. Both players were under probably severe time trouble. So it's difficult to judge here or anything. But anyway, like Grischuk playing with king d4. I think just f6 was, you know, why to give the pawn? There's no reason to give this pawn. But anyway, king d4 happened, bishop takes f7. But right now, this is a very important and instructive moment for this game. Right now, I think Grischuk made a losing mistake, or from practical point of view, losing mistake. Even though maybe I checked it with engines, and according to my analysis, unless I missed something, White is already winning after his mistake right now. However, if Grischuk play with king c3, simply, right? I think that the endgame would be, you know, still very, very close to a draw. But anyway, there was no need to keep this to give up this pawn. Anyway, what I'm trying to say is that we have to keep this king somehow contained here, and do not allow this king escape. Because what happened in the game, that here he played bishop b8, and suddenly king comes towards the queen side right now. King d2, king c2, and even though we may not seem immediate win here for white, suddenly this king has possibility to go around here and get activated, and suddenly it's not easy for black to make a draw anymore. The game for bishop f4, king c2, bishop e5, and again just king e2, bishop d6, trying to prevent the king from coming. But anyway, there will be some Zugzwang. Let's say bishop g8, and suddenly, okay, they repeated moves. Bishop g6. Now it's a Zugzwang because pawn on the free square is covered. The king cannot go there, and if the king goes anywhere else, I may consider playing king c3. And if this bishop goes somewhere else, then, you know, I mean, this bishop has to stay on this diagonal. So, because otherwise pawn b7 pawn promotes. And then if this bishop retreats from d6, then white goes king a3. And that's exactly why white, I think, wins. Because after bishop c7, king a3, king comes, king c5, king a4, and, okay, king b6. So right now I think they repeated move position several times. This doesn't matter. This didn't change the valuation of the position at all. Eventually, Nepomniachtchi played move b4, and this is all correct strategy. By the way, all the repetition here by Nepomniachtchi is a very good strategy because even though it seems like it doesn't bring anything to the position, in reality it gains several. First of all, gains some time. Let's say if he was you know, down on a clock or something, he could have gotten some time by such a you know strategy of repeating moves and positions. And this is one thing. And second thing, you are not declaring yet what kind of strategy to play for when you to show too early, and you don't want to, let's say, do it whenever you have too little time. You want to have you want to decide on you know, some action whenever you have more time, and you can actually evaluate and calculate and so on. And also it gives there's also a saying in chess is the execution the threat is stronger than its execution. So meaning like that, you know, the threat of, let's say, you know, playing before at some point is in the air all the time. Black has to always consider it, and it may be difficult basically to spot the right moment to, you know, to kind of like to face it in the proper way, sort of. So after b4, a takes b4, king takes b4, finally Nepomniachtchi played this pawn break, and right now the plan for white is to bring the king towards this pawn. The king comes right now to the queen side. If the king comes to the queen side, the game is just over, because pawn h6 is lost. And again, there are two weaknesses. One weakness is pawn on h6, which is a weak pawn, and second weakness is pawn on b7, more like the fact that pawn is on white pawn is on b7 because it restricts black pieces, especially this bishop or the king, to defending here on this pawn from queening. So after and right now when I was analyzing this endgame, I thought that king c7 was a better defense. And the idea in general here is to sort of, after for instance king c5, play move king d8. And right now, if let's say white plays some move like king d5 or something like this, king e7. And again, right now this could be a draw. Why? Because there is no breakthrough suddenly. I don't see a breakthrough here for white. So this will be a huge save for Grischuk if he managed to pull this off. Because after king e4, of course, king wants to go here, but then we go again king f6. So there are sort of like corresponding squares. Usually we talk about corresponding squares in pawn endgames, but here also in this endgame it applies. Whenever white king is on e4, black king has to be on f6. Whenever king is here, the king has to be, let's say, here. And whenever king is on c6, also king has to be on e7. So basically, black has to just stay on those two squares, e7, f6. With the king, and there is nothing absolutely white can do because there is no breakthrough towards this h6 pawn. Essentially, black has only one weakness, which is pawn b7, because everything else on the king side is totally blocked. So therefore, I think this was a better defense to play king d8. So the question is, okay, so if king d8 is such a great defense followed by king e7 and so on, how white can win? Because as you know, I said it's winning, so how white can win? And it's pretty instructive, I think, how white can win, because white can play move king b6, and suddenly king a7 is a big threat. So so it makes sense to play bishop b8. Makes sense to play with bishop b8 to stop this, king from going this way. And but right now, white wins in pretty much an only way. There's only one way to win, f4. If nothing else, again, just king c6, just king e7, and the king suddenly is in time to catch everything, activity with f4 and so on. Also f4 I just simply can take because there is no king a7. Also if bishop f4, of course king a7 follows and white promotes the queen. After this I can go here and b8 queen next. So the only move is g takes f4, and right now white plays with g5. So creates a second passed pawn on the king side, and exactly what this is what we discussed in the game of my game versus Turkish Grandmaster Dastan, in which I had to create two passed pawns that are far away from each other. Exactly same strategy here applies by Nepomniachtchi. In Nepomniachtchi's game, I mean. So g5. So, but the question is, what to do after we move king e7? Do we take on h6 or we play g6? And again, the difference is extremely subtle, but basically one leads to a draw, one is a win. So the thing is that after g takes h6 is a draw. Because why? Again, pawn on the square on h8 is is a dark square, so this bishop on c is pretty much useless in that sense. So I can just bring my king to the king side by king f8, and okay, if I bring my king right now to g8 and h8, it's immediate draw. So normal move is bishop e6 to try to stop this king from getting to this square. However, right now because we have pawn f4, we can play move f3, and we can just distract the white bishop from this, task of stopping the king from getting to h8. After bishop f1, king g8, this is immediate draw because king has to h8, and we will give this a bishop for the pawn b7, and this is immediate draw. For example, this, b8, even this. I mean anything. I just stay on those two squares and it's just immediate draw. There is nothing absolutely white can do to win. So that's pretty much it on this g takes h6. However, therefore, in this position, the only winning move is to, of course, play move g6, as we know we want to have two passed pawns. We are as far away as possible from each other, but they cannot basically, and promote to the square of the, if it's the rook pawn, it can promote the square of the opposite color of the bishop. our own bishop. So g6 right now wins because right now we easily stop pawn on f2 and pawn f4, and black is not able, similarly as my game against Dastan, to stop both b and g pawns from queening. For example, f3, bishop h3, simply stopping, bishop f1, king comes to c6, g7 probably at some point will be played, will be some Zugzwang as well. The game is just decided. The game is just decided. Okay, but anyway, in the game for king b, king c6, okay, sorry, after king b4, king c7 was the best defense, because then Nepomniachtchi would have to find this brilliant idea of f4, king b6 and now f4. It may not have been entirely easy to find over the board, especially in in rapid game with limited time control, with being already low on time. However, Grischuk playing with king c6, which also seems like a logical move. But this idea, this king c6 move is not as good, because right now this king cannot ever go there because pawn promotes the queen. That's why after king c4 the game is just immediately over, because white king gets over this path towards g6 square and h6 pawn, and the game is just over. King bishop e5, bishop f5. Which was correct move. Again, we can just even give this b pawn, because as long as we get to h6 pawn, the game is just decided. We got this pawn, and suddenly by playing king h7, h6, king g8, there is nothing we can do. Black can do to stop this pawn, h pawn from queening. H6, and suddenly bishop a2, and again there is no way to stop h pawn from queening, because bishop from f8 has to move or king has to move, and then king either g6 or g8, depending if the king moves or bishop moves, and white wins. So this is, I think, a very interesting endgame. Another endgame that kind of like caught my attention is a very old and classic game between Mikhail Botvinnik and Alexander Kotov from 1955, I believe. Very old game. However, the endgame is pretty much in every chess textbook, I believe. But I would like to discuss this position from here. So Botvinnik went for such endgame, believing for sure that he was winning. And let me actually flip the board, because we are more interested from black's perspective this time. And it seems like this should be winning, right? Because the b pawn is far away, and kind of like, meaning it's advanced. There are all sort of light squares available. We can for sure try to bring our king towards this b pawn and win the game. So let's see, bishop d4, bishop e4 followed. We have to defend this bishop. King g3, king f7 logical, h4 also logical. Otherwise, pawn h3 will be object of the attack maybe in the future. And right now this is the critical position. And I don't know if this was in some textbooks or something. For sure it was, but the thing is that I discovered here one nuance that I don't know, maybe was missed. I don't know, maybe it wasn't missed. I have no idea right now. But anyway, what I found is instructive here is that Botvinnik's move g6 right now, by defending simply g6 pawn, g7 pawn, trying to bring the king, a6, f5, and so on towards the queen side, is ruining this position for black, and it's actually a draw basically right now, which is surprising. But what it shows is that activity of the king in the end games, and basically tempo, having having played very dynamically and as quickly as possible, developing the ideas. Also is important, not only the rule do not hurry. Sometimes you have to know when you have to use calculation and basically go for direct, let's say, solutions, rather than just be like whatever. Let's just play something and then think. Here basically why it's very important to approach this position in a different manner, rather than this typical do not hurry rule. The point is that if white king sort of gets towards, let's say, d2 or something, white king will be able to stop his b pawn, and bishop will try to somehow stop those, white's king from attacking this pawn on h4, and so on. So it will become pretty much difficult to win this position, and we'll see in a moment what could have happened. However, at first let's see how Botvinnik could have won this game. King g6 was the best move. King g6, and the idea is of course to play with king f5. We ignore pawn on g7 because what matters is okay. First of all, why we ignore? We ignore the pawn because we don't really need this pawn as much. Because pawn on f4 is blocked anyway by the pawn bishop on e4, and what we need is to activate this king as quickly as possible towards g4 or to e4 and d3 and basically get this b pawn to promote. So after bishop c5, let's say analyze b3, bishop d4. Seemingly you have to wait. There's not much you can do anyway. Bishop d3, bishop b2, and just some random analysis. Doesn't matter. Basically, at some point, finding white goes king, black goes king f5, and we ignore this pawn on g7 because right now king e4, and as I said, king comes to c2. Of course, we can start with bishop g4 first to control f5, but anyway, king d2, king d3, king c2 falls, and b2, and black wins the game. And if king f2, black to white tries to bring the king after king g6, also is very logical. Now king f5 and king g4 this time comes in. So after bishop g7, king g4, bishop f6, and simply b3, and suddenly it will be Zugzwang, because bishop has to defend both here and here, but this king is too far away from this pawn to basically catch it. And after king e2, if they're trying to get this king closer, right now black can play with d4, which is a key idea in this entire endgame. On similar endgame, by the way, Botvinnik won this game eventually because Kotov made a mistake. However, here after e takes d4, of course b2 promotes the queen, so bishop has to take. But after bishop takes, again king takes h4, and again we have two passed pawns which are far away from each other, and this is exactly what black wants to achieve in such position. Again, ideas of h4, h3, is unstoppable. And right now, even though we have passed pawn on the rook passed pawn, it is the h1 square is of the color of the bishop we have. So this example where it simply wins. This simply wins for black. So this is how black should have played, how Botvinnik should have played. Instead, he played move g6. So let's see how white suddenly can make a draw here. King f2, immediately bringing the king to the king side, stopping this pawn, stopping b pawn, or trying to stop this pawn with the king, and this bishop is supposed to hold those pawns on the queen side, on the king side in the center. So king e6 is logical, king e2, king f5, similarly logical, but suddenly king d2, and this king is just in time basically to stop this b pawn, and suddenly it is not easy to win this anymore because king g4 is met by bishop f6 obviously. Anytime d4 happens, we can take with the e pawn because this king is very close to this b pawn here. So after move like king g3, in the game follow bishop e7, which is okay. Some triangulation which doesn't bring anything absolutely. Bishop e7. Of course, one may ask, why not bishop takes b4? Again, bishop takes b4 would result in king h4, and suddenly, even though we don't have b pawn anymore, this h pawn is well guarded, especially also by the king here, and black wins. So white cannot just give up this h4 pawn. It's very important to keep this pawn. So king g4, bishop e7, bishop f5. Botvinnik tries to maneuver around. Bishop f6, king f3, bishop e7, b3, and finally played b3, and now king c3. Correct. That's why this king needs to be very close to the queen side to stop this b pawn from queening. So king c3, bishop e6, a very tricky move because right now king b3 is not possible because of d4 discovery, right? Just to show it, and yeah, and this position. So right now, white to play, and white actually can make a draw, and white can make a draw by simply playing with king d2, and there is no way to break through here with white, with black. I mean, there is no way to make any progress because if king f2 or something, I can just wait king d3. I just wait on those to square my king, and there is nothing you can black can do, because whenever bishop f5 falls, I immediately go king c3, and and the resulting endgame is drawish. For instance, after move kings, let's say king c3, already here Botvinnik could have taken on e3, right? So similar endgame, right? So king b3 is a draw, because after d4 we can play, let's say, bishop c5, and I'm stopping this d4 pawn. So after king e4, let's say I go king b2, I go back towards d2, and you know, even if I lose f4 pawn somehow, like, it will be a total draw, it will be the draw here. So that's why with king d2 here would have basically resulted in such drawish endgame. However, in this position after bishop e6, Kotov made a huge mistake. He played with bishop c5, and this seemingly natural move, because why would I move my king from c3 if I came here all the way from the king side just to stop this b pawn? So why would I, you know, move my king back towards the center, away from the b pawn, if I can just defend my pawn on e3 with bishop and keep pawn pressuring this pawn on b3? And it appears to be a huge mistake, because, as I said, pawn h4 is the critical pawn, not pawn b3, but defending pawn on h4 is the way more important than, maybe not way more important, but equally important as stopping b pawn. And b pawn and the b pawn is stopped. So it makes sense to keep, you know, pawn on h4 very well guarded, because bishop c5, after bishop c5, suddenly black takes an only moment, takes the only occasion basically to break through, and suddenly black plays g5, and with g5, h takes g5 leads to lost position after h4, and pawn goes to the queen. And if f takes g5, black can play move d4. And again, we are supporting this pawn b3. We want to have the pass pawn as far as possible. And after e takes d4, we play king g3, and we are winning this h4 pawn. Again, very important move, because if king f2 king here, d5 and bishop f2 will be a draw, which is very close. But e takes d4, king g3 is a very accurate move, followed by king takes h4. And again, we have right now two pass pawn. We'll have two pass pawn, b3 and h5, and they are simply going forward. There is no way to stop them. After bishop a3, king takes h4, king d3, king g5. G6 didn't change anything. Wouldn't change anything. Just king comes and pawn goes, because bishop stops, you know, here everything. After bishop a3 takes, king g5, h4, bishop d5. Here Kotov resigned, because it is simply winning position for black. So yeah, I think that's pretty much what I wanted to cover today in today's lecture about opposite color bishops. I think there was also interesting examples, especially some you know, new discovery, or I suppose, I don't know if new, but like instructive discovery by me in this last endgame of Kotov versus Botvinnik. And you know, I showed also some interesting strategies how to approach, you know, from black's perspective, how to not black, like from defensive side, how to, you know, make a draw. I'll quickly come back to the game of Nepomniachtchi Grischuk. Here not this position, but here with king d8, this line, whenever white doesn't play for this king b6 and f4, and instead after, let's say, this just maneuvers with the king. So very often we want to, you know, the corresponding squares, we want to basically shoulder our opponent's king from, you know, getting to the squares where he wants to go. So lots of interesting ideas from both attacking side and defensive side. In general, those endgames are not as trivial as they seem, and there are lots of, you know, hidden maneuvers and nuances that are worth discovering, and hence I decided such topic for today's lecture, because I found it simply very interesting. Okay, that will be all for now. I'll be back with the next lesson, with the next lecture, which is on games of the week, and I will talk about some games from the recent tournament opera tour, right? From the Champions Chess Tour. So Opera Rapid for the Champions Chess Tour. So stay tuned for this. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed it. And see you guys. Have a good day. Have a good evening.